Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to our webinar using a JavaScript library with Blazor presented by DevExpress CTO Julian Bucknell and DevExpress technical evangelist Paul Usher. Microsoft's Blazor library promises a great deal for ASP.NET C# developers, but since it is so new and unreleased, there are gaps in supported native libraries for it, whether commercial or open source. In this session, see Paul and Julian gingerly wade into the deep waters of using a well-regarded open source JavaScript widget library with Blazor. They'll show how to merge the library seamlessly into a Blazor app, get data into and from the JavaScript widget, plus how to interface that widget with standard Blazor controls on the same page. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. We will also send the link to the recording in a follow-up email. We also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul and Julian.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone. Today is the first in a series of lightning talks that Julian and I decided we would like to present over the coming months. Speaking of, good morning, Julian.
Good morning, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Yes, Paul and I had this discussion, about a month ago or something like that, where we were saying it would be kind of fun to do these webinars where we just basically target one topic and show people either how to code it, how to use it, how to interact with it, or whatever it may be, but just basically targeting a single item. And we had a long discussion back and forth, and one of the things that Paul happened to be working on was interfacing a JavaScript library with Blazor. Now, yes, we know Blazor is not released yet and things are changing, but it was worth the investigation, I think.
Absolutely. Couple of pre-notes here, Julian. Of course, today is going to be a little different in the session. It's what we call a lightning talk. So we're going to be sort of finishing up around the half-hour mark, which is a bit of a different format. And just listening to Amanda read that summary back, I was just almost bursting out with laughter as to the whole gingerly stepping through a JavaScript library there.
Yes, at the time, we were very ginger about it, and we've lost your screen, by the way, Paul. I don't know what you did. Oh, no. And so, yes, here we go, back again. So, in essence, we weren't sure. We'd never actually tried this with Blazor before, and so we went out and we selected a well-regarded open source widget library, and here's a quick demo of it. Oh no, you're going to actually show us.
No, we're gonna step through that. So prerequisites: if you're using Blazor, you must be using Visual Studio 2019 Preview. That's a very, very important part of this. Of course, we do have our Blazor components, which are in early access mode or preview right now, so they're available. We've got some fantastic videos on Blazor that Oliver put together. If you have got a little bit of time available, we'll definitely recommend going through all of those. And I'm going to put some links up for those later on. There's some great work there. To get started with Blazor, in particular with our components in Blazor, the team have put up on our GitHub page exactly what you need to do, setting up your environment. All of that is stepped out at that point. So I'm not going to be going through any of that today. It's all available. And again, I'll put the links up at the end of the presentation. But for today, we're going to take a look at this little third-party library. I say little, it's actually not. And a big shout out to Ricardo for the work he's done here. I'm a big fan of this style of workflow, which is a Kanban board. Now, Julian, you can just explain what that is.
Well, essentially a Kanban board is like a whiteboard public space, and you you stick post-it notes to it. And here we have this example where we have a to-do list, things to be working on list, and a list which has stuff which has been done, because it's public, and you're essentially trying to move these post-it notes, these tasks, if you like, from one subboard to another subboard to show progress in whatever you're doing. And it's generally for an agile methodology when we're talking about coding and all the rest of it. And the reason we chose this particular JavaScript library was because we, DevExpress, don't have a client-side Kanban control. We do not. So rather than showing you, hey, here's another DevExpress component and we're just using Blazor, we're going to use a third-party library, because we're going to guess, for a little while at least, Blazor support, at least in the sense of components for Blazor, are going to be in short supply, shall we say. And so I imagine that many of our attendees will be trying this out themselves. Hey, I need this kind of library for Blazor and nobody's got one, but I'll have to use this open source version. So that's what we're doing here. We have the JKanban library, and we are going to run a little application here. Familiar to everybody, I should think.
Absolutely. So the thing that I particularly liked about the library we've chosen is it's got a built-in API that we're going to be calling. It's just clean. It's a really nice piece of work. And as you mentioned, I don't think, even though the whole premise of Blazor is to be using C# as a web developer for the front end, we're going to be stuck with the fact that there's so much content out there in the JavaScript world. So what we've got here, before I start breaking it down, is a standard Blazor template. So we've got the counter example that's been used countless times, pardon the pun.
Very good.
The weather forecast, which Brisbane's not on here right now, but at 5 degrees, it's freezing. And then we have our Kanban implementation. And what we're going to be looking at is how this is interacting with my Blazor page, and how I can do things like add new items, drag things across, as well as some other functionality. But before I get too far ahead, I want to break down what's actually happening here in Visual Studio. Now, the first thing I want to do is note that I am using this boilerplate template. So all I've done is created a new link item, so nav link, pointing to my Kanban page, which is this Kanban Razor page we're going to look at, and just set up a little task icon. So nothing flash there. When you are using JavaScript libraries, I've actually brought in the files that I wanted to already. Solution Explorer, you can see I've got my JKanban files, which is the CSS and the .js file, and our own JS file here that we'll step through. I've also got a Kanban data class that we're going to take a look at. But in order to use JavaScript in a Blazor project, the first thing to do is actually reference it in the startup. I'm using a server-side project, which means that my references need to go in this _host CSHML file. If you're using the client-side version, then your startup would be, or your references would be in index.html. That's just one of the subtle differences. I've chosen server-side because it is what Microsoft are going to be releasing first, and effectively everything we're doing now can be used in both anyway. There are a couple of minor intricacies if you're using client-side with interop. There are some extra things you can do, but this is really just to whet everybody's appetite. You can see that I've got the reference to the CSS and the JS file here, and then reference to our own file. So that's nice and straightforward. The JKanban library itself, I'm using the non-minified version so that we can see everything that's going on. It is a really clean library to work with. But to actually implement it, let's take a look at our kanban.razor file. One of the nice things here, I've got this set up with the page attribute, which means that I effectively can render this whole file as a page. Without that, or even with that, I could use it as a Razor component. You can see that I'm using the using statement to implement my data namespace. And you'll also notice that every time I'm using the @ symbol, I'm effectively referencing C# code. So here we've got this @ symbol. We look down here, the @ on click is pointing to an @ method name, which all reside inside the same file, being the way that the Blazor syntax and Blazor page is set up. The important one to notice here, Julian, is this inject statement. So dependency injection, we're using add inject, and we're implementing the interface for the JavaScript runtime library, which is part of the Blazor framework. But it's the critical one. Miss this line and you're going to get errors and things will not work. What we can see in essence is that line there, the div tag with an ID of my Kanban. That's the only thing that's important to implement the Kanban library. I've just got it decorated around with a bootstrap card, and I'm working inside the card body for now. How does this work? I'm pleased you asked. If I jump over to my Kanban JavaScript file, so with the fact that the JavaScript is loaded in the host file, it means that everything gets loaded as soon as the project runs. So in essence, we're going to be running this particular piece of code. Now, Julian, I'll let you explain a little bit about those visible lines.
So as Paul mentioned, the kanban.js file is going to get loaded right at the beginning of the Blazor application. And what we have declared here is an auto-execute function. Pure standard JavaScript, nothing magic here at all. So we're essentially creating a function, and the function is going to do some work. Immediately the JavaScript file is read in the browser. And what we're trying to emphasize here is this function is going to take the window object from the DOM, the standard window object everybody knows about, and we're going to call it inside the function itself something called global, because I want to try and emphasize the fact that Blazor just talks to this global object. That's it. So rather than just calling it window, let's call it global, and we're emphasizing the fact that what we're doing in here is visible to every other bit of JavaScript around. And what the build me function actually does is it's going to create a new JKanban panel, standard constructor here from the open source library, and we're going to, right at the end there, we're going to assign that newly constructed object to a global object called myKanban. And in fact, these are the only two global elements, be they objects, be they functions, be they whatever, that we are going to create in this JavaScript application, or in this Blazor application. The one is called build me, that's the one that actually builds the object, the Kanban object itself, and that's going to be called myKanban. And what we're trying to do here is just emphasize that Blazor just talks to the window global object. That's it. That's all it does.
Absolutely. Once I call the build me method, it's going to instantiate this new Kanban object. It's got some basic functionality set up in here, whether we see the add button. But what I want to call out is that we're passing in this parameter called boards, which gets set internally and down here. Now the Kanban board itself works with JSON structure. So you've got an object which is a board. A board has got a few properties, and then a collection of items, and those items have a few properties. They can be expanded or extended as much as you want, and what we want to look at is how I can then pass my POCO or plain old CLR object into this JavaScript library while maintaining all my data management and all the cool stuff back in C#. We come back to the Blazor page and have a look through. You'll notice that we've got this function block, which is where all the C# goodness is going to start happening. And we've got this on after render event, which is part of the Blazor framework, part of that page lifecycle. It's going to fire each time a render is required on this page. You can see just above that I've got this collection. I'm just using a list. You use any type of enumerator of kboard. Let's drill down and look at what kboard is all about. So inside my data layer, I've got this class called kboard, which has some basic elements. One of the really nice things here is I mentioned the JSON object, and of course if you're familiar with JavaScript, you'll know that the typical syntax is lowercase inside JavaScript, whereas for C#, you generally set your properties or field names with an uppercase. The framework handles that interaction, so I don't need to worry about the fact that inside the JavaScript library it's looking for a lowercase I, lowercase t, etc. So this is the basic structure of the JSON object that I want to pass through. We've got an ID, a title, class, so you can actually set the class difference depending on the board. And if we just jump back to this example, you'll see an example here of that happening where we're affecting the class on the different board types. And I've been playing around extending that into the items and lots of cool things there as well. We can see that we've got another collection of string, which are boards that I can drag between. From that earlier scenario, I can only drag done items back into working. I can't drag them all the way over. So you've got some nice functionality there to stop things like that happening. I've just implemented a simple collection of string to handle that. And then we've got the final thing, which is a collection of ktask, which becomes my item. In the constructor here, I've just overloaded it to allow that information to be passed in nice and simply. And my ktask object is literally just an ID and a title at this stage. So nice and straightforward. Back to our Razor file, and we can see the first time through the boards object is going to be null. So I know that this is only going to run on the one time. For purposes of today, I'm just showing manual implementation. Obviously you'd do this via the data layer. You'd be pulling the data from a SQL database or some other storage in the back end. Another thing I just want to point out, the strange highlighting on the syntax here is again native Blazor, and it's done so that everywhere in your code that you look, anything that's highlighted with this background of gray is clearly C# or Blazor syntax that's happening, so it just helps differentiate that. I've played around turning it off and turning it on, but for today I've left it as default. What we're doing here, we've instantiated a new board, passing in the ID, the title, and the other boards that I can drag and drop to, and then I've just dropped in a couple of simple tasks for that board. Instantiate my collection so that I don't get a null reference exception, and then added the board to it. And then I decided, well, there's no point showing you one board, I might as well add another one, so I've just added a quick element into that, calling it the done board. Typically these IDs would be some other primary key coming from your database. I've got a note here that yes, I would normally just run a method called getActiveTasks from that data class. If you implement an interface there, obviously it makes it a lot easier to swap things in and out. The important line really is this line here, which is the JS. So we're calling that reference to our JavaScript runtime, calling the invoke async. Now, it is possible to just call invoke, but of course, most things, I could almost say everything that happens in JavaScript world is done asynchronously, so it's good practice to get into using this async functionality. If your method doesn't return a value, you can use a bool here, but it does require a return item inside there. You'll notice that I'm calling that buildMe method and passing in my parameter, which is my C# implementation of that list of boards. So I'm not doing any serialization here. I'm not having to call out to a JSON library or anything else. I'm just passing through my raw collection. I also want to just highlight the fact that I'm calling buildMe. I'm not calling window.buildMe. I'm not calling anything else. Blazor will only use the window object, so I only need to reference what's happening on that window object. And of course, if I run this project up again, we'll see exactly what happens. At least the compile didn't take long that time. And there's our information coming through. And so that's handled by that JavaScript interop. And I've got my drag drop functionality at this point. I'll click on add item, and then we'll take a look at the code behind the add item button. So this has added this new task, which has got all the same functionality. And One thing that's available in the JavaScript library is the ability to ask for a new task. So here it's just doing all this client side, and we've got that element of Julian is here. Before I get too far ahead, let's take a look at the button code for add Kanban item. Typically I'd be running off to get the next ID, adding it to the data collection, and then call the JavaScript. For today, I'm just manually creating this send email announcement, which we saw the card come through, and again calling this invoke async. We're still at the window level, but now I'm calling a method that's on my Kanban library. So this add element method, which is taking in a new object of backlog, and again, I'm not serializing, I'm not doing anything special, I'm just using my C# class library and passing it through. If we take a peek into the actual source code of the JKanban library, I'm just going to do a search for add item.
Add element.
Oh, I got that wrong again, didn't I? Add element. And we can see that there's the original code on that library. So that's not something I've added. It's directly inside that JavaScript library. And I'm referencing it by calling my instantiated object and then the code behind. And as we saw with that example, which is still running, the send email announcement is on the board. That's simple enough to be able to push data from my C# classes using things that I'm familiar with, such as my lists or my enumerated types of objects, onto that JavaScript object. What I've done since is then added a manual one, and I've also been playing around moving things backwards and forwards. So how do I get data back out of that library? At this point, I extended the Kanban library to say get elements, which comes through and wraps itself around finding or using the query selector to return a list of nodes that are sitting on the DOM. I'm then simply running through and pushing to an array just the ID of those elements. Now this screams refactor, this screams just start adding in. It may be that if I'm giving people the ability to edit the title, I might bring back that object, which of course the interop will handle again, translation or the serialization between my object that gets pushed back. In this case, it's just going to be a string of identifiers. And if we take a quick look at the library or the method for get board elements, we can see that again I'm calling this invoke async. At this point I'm having to wait to make sure the actual method, we're waiting for that method to finish at the JavaScript level, so almost the concept of returning a promise comes back. The object type is the string array. I'm calling my Kanban object, and again that method sitting on the core library, and I'm passing in the ID of what I want to see. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint here and then call the get elements method. We can see that returned is a list of string, and I've got element 2, 3, and null. Null is obviously the object that I created at the JavaScript level. So very, very simply, I can get data in and I can retrieve data out of that JavaScript library. I'd take it from here to extend it further to start saying, well, how can I interact with the library and get event mechanisms wired up to retrieve information? So if somebody adds an item or somebody drags an item, that will then be sent back as an event. And that's something that is still very much work in progress, and I'll be including in a blog post in the future. But it basically is all about this tag called JS Invocable that I could call from within my JavaScript. So if we look at the add task, it has just the same as we had the JS library pushing data from C# into Blazor. We've got an implementation of .NET being able to invoke methods back inside my C# code. So this is where we're going to take the project as a bit of a plaything later on. The final thing I wanted to show is how we've extended. So we've got this standard JKBan library. I know that if I wanted to, I could go in and modify the code behind there. Might not be such a good idea if I'm wanting to keep that library up to date with what the author does. So instead, using standard JS functionality is actually add this method. So I've created one called Julian Rocks, added that to this object that gets created. And just to show you that is working the same. Looks like I closed the window, Julian.
Ah.
Come down to Kanban and ask the question, who rocks? Oh dear, we have an error.
And we have an error. The reason is, again, to emphasize the fact that Blazor just talks to the window object, and there is no Julian Rocks method on the window object. In other words, what we managed to do here deliberately is to forget to put in the identifier of the object which has that particular method. So it should be mykanban.julianrocks, and that would actually work properly. So this is just to emphasize, if you like, that Blazor talks to the window DOM object. That's all it does. Yes, it downloads the JavaScript library, but all it does is talks to the window object. Or, you know, the methods, the objects have to be there on window, not on anything else. So now we can call who rocks, and we get the alert.
Although you did point out at one, it is only locally that you rock, so that's...
There we go. So one of the other important things to notice is we're always using invoke async, that particular call, on our JavaScript interrupt library, or on the Blazor interrupt library, I should say. And if you're just saying, okay, display this stuff, client side, where I don't care whether it happens or not, then you don't have to wait for an answer. But obviously, if you do require information back from the JavaScript side of things, then you'll have to use the await keyword on the invoke call.
Absolutely. So Julian, we said that we're going to do this as a lightning talk. We've got some time for questions. A couple of things I want to bring up. Here are the key links for today. devexpress.com/Blazor. Find out all about our Blazor components. Go to our GitHub page for instructions on how to implement those, which of course must be used with a preview version right now. And those amazing videos that Oliver has put together sitting on our supports training Blazor URL there. And of course, again, a final shout out to Ricardo for that Kanban library, which I particularly love. One of the things before we hit the questions is just to also ask people for feedback in terms of whether you like these short, quick snap presentations, the value that you can get from them, and of course, topics that you would like to see moving forward in this type of fashion or format.
Indeed, and the topics can be anything. Okay, yes, we were talking about Blazor here, but by no means do we want to just talk about Blazor all the time in these lightning webinars. If you're a WinForms thing, fine, let's talk about WinForms. If you've got an XAF question, some topic, you're not quite sure how it all works with such and such, let us know and we'll draw up a webinar to show you. And so on and so forth. You know, if it's WPF, then hey, but again, single topic items are best because we just basically want to deep dive into that single topic, show you the answer if you like, or show you how to do it or how to code it up, and then, you know, we'll move on to the next topic.
Absolutely. Julian, there aren't too many questions, which is surprising.
Okay. All right.
The questions that we have had: what font is Paul using in Visual Studio? I'll show you that in 1 second. Will we make the source code available? Absolutely. I'm going to be doing a blog post which will include the source code and also some of the other things that I've been playing around with in this particular project. To answer the font question, I'm using a font called Victor Mono. It is one that I came across recently. Before that I was using Furacode, but Victor Mono I found to be amazing. It has all the ligatures that you might want to find, and it is really, oh, I thought they had one for that. It is really quite a smart font to work with. So just Google Victor Mono and you will see what's going on there. So with no other questions, we just also want to mention that we've got a charts presentation coming up in a month's time to talk about all things charts. In particular, I hate when somebody comes and says, how do I build this chart? I'm not a maths person. That's what we have Julian there for, plus his JavaScript skills. And so, yeah.
It's basically going to be talking about nomenclature for charts, what the x-axis is, what the y-axis is, arguments versus values and all that kind of good stuff, and what charts are good charts and so on and so forth. Just a brief, very basic intro to charting, I would say.
I love how you throw that word in that I'm sure, well, not non-nomenclature, what?
Nomenclature. Why things are called what they're called in charting. There we go.
Like that word itself.
Yeah, indeed. From the Latin.
So register for that presentation. Give us the feedback if you want to see some other quick lightning talk topics. We don't want to get bogged down in all the technical detail, and it is certainly a lot of fun doing this sort of thing. So thank you so much. We will hand you back to Amanda.
Hello, gentlemen. So we did get some more comments. Do more of the little focus webinars on Blazor, especially making components which use your components. So something like component composition.
Actually, when we were talking to the charting team, they said, show them how to use our charts in Blazor.
Which we're going to do.
We just got to, write it up and dream what we're going to say and how we're going to say it and all that kind of stuff. So wait out for that one.
And then Pete says, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead. I was going to answer the exact same question. You can read it out.
Great minds. What's the release schedule for Blazor? Is that known yet?
Okay, so the team, we're looking to actually have a preview of the schedule component in the next preview release. It's one of those components that I definitely want to get my hands on and start playing with. So as soon as it is available, in fact, we will schedule another quick Blazor one with some of our components and include that in it.
But was the question about our controls, or whether Blazor itself is going to get released, or when Blazor itself is going to get released?
No, that was more on the release. Oh, sorry, release schedule. I misread that. I read that as the scheduler control. The release schedule for Blazor. We are expecting to release our components in tandem with the server-side release of Blazor later. I think it's September that Microsoft have that scheduled for. So we're running all the components in preview, and we're looking to do a public beta in about August, and we are going to be releasing at the same time as Microsoft makes their official announcement. Mehul has very kindly posted a link, which is in the questions. So Amanda, can you post that to everybody, please? Which is the roadmap and what you can expect in the next few months, which is on Mehul's blog. So the team have been very active as far as the making updates available as and when, which is something a little bit different to maybe our normal release cadence. I'm just going to bring those links back up for anybody that still wants to grab them. The links will be posted on a blog post as well, with the source code and a breakdown as to what we went through. Blazor itself, I think, is going to really open up the development world for C# developers into that web UI. So I know, for example, there's already a large organization in Australia, who I won't name just yet, that is looking at releasing a major application to all their outlets by the time Microsoft release it. So it's definitely getting some excitement out there in the marketplace. I think that's just about it from me.
Will Blazor be part of web controls?
Still undecided.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Like I mentioned before, this webinar will be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. The link, I'll post the link to our YouTube channel in the chat box. While you're on our YouTube channel, please subscribe if you haven't already and ring that little notification bell so you're notified when we release new content. You will also get a follow-up email with a link to this webinar recording if you or your account has opted in for notifications from DevExpress. And that is it for this one. Thanks to Julian and Paul. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.